Of all the stories we've covered on this channel, this is the one I thought about the longest before deciding to tell. Not because it's the most violent, not because it's the most disturbing in the ways you might expect, but because what's at the center of this story, what was at the center of it 400 years ago, before anyone cleaned it up, is something that audiences in 2026 are going to find harder to sit with than a glass coffin or a pair of iron shoes. The story you know, a princess is cursed at birth. She pricks her finger on a spinning wheel. She falls into a deep sleep. A prince finds her, kisses her, she wakes up. They live happily ever after. Disney's version, the Brothers Grimm version. Clean, romantic, safe. Now let me tell you what Giambattista Basile wrote in 1634. 60 years before Perrault, 178 years before the Brothers Grimm. In his version, which scholars consider the first fully developed literary telling of this story, the princess falls into what appears to be death, not sleep. She is placed on a velvet throne in an abandoned palace. Her father locks the doors and never returns. She lies there alone for years. A king on a hunting trip finds the palace. He finds her. He calls her name. He shakes her. She doesn't wake. And then, the text is explicit about this. He carries her to a bed. She wakes up not because of a kiss. She wakes up because she has given birth to twins while still unconscious, and one of the infants, searching for milk, accidentally sucks the splinter from her finger. She opens her eyes in an empty palace with two children she has no memory of conceiving, lying beside her. That is the original Sleeping Beauty, and that is what this episode is about. Giambattista Basile was born around 1575 in Naples. He was a soldier, a government official, and a poet, the kind of educated man in 17th century Italy who collected folk stories the way other collectors gathered coins or paintings. His collection, Illinois Pentamerone, The Story of Stories, was published posthumously in 1634, 2 years after his death. It contained 50 tales told across 5 days, in the framing device of a group of women entertaining a noble woman. Basile wrote in Neapolitan dialect, which made his collection feel raw and vernacular even by the standards of his time. Most importantly, Basile was not writing for children. He was writing for an adult courtly audience that would have recognized the stories as retellings of much older material, oral tales that had been circulating in Italian villages for centuries. His versions preserved elements that later, more genteel collectors would remove. Basile is the source. Charles Perrault, writing in 1697, drew directly on Basile's Pentamerone for multiple stories, including Sleeping Beauty. The Brothers Grimm, writing in 1812, drew on Perrault. Disney, in 1959, drew on the Grimms. Each step of that chain removed something from what Basile had written. By the time the story reached a cinema screen in the mid-20th century, it had been passed through 4 layers of editing, each one pushing it further from what the original tale actually described. Scholars debate exactly how old the Sleeping Beauty story is. A version appears in the anonymous French romance Perrault, composed sometime between 1330 and 1344. In that version, 2.5 centuries before Basile, the plot is structurally similar. A sleeping princess, a king who finds her, children born while she sleeps. There are also strong parallels with Norse mythology. The Valkyrie Brynhild, punished by Odin, imprisoned behind a wall of fire, sleeping until a hero arrives. This is the connection that convinced the Brothers Grimm to include their version in their collection despite suspecting it was derived from French sources. It felt German enough because of Brynhild. What this means is that the story is at least 700 years old in its literary form, and almost certainly much older in oral tradition. And for most of that history, the man who finds the sleeping woman does not simply kiss her. Let me tell you the story Basile actually wrote. A great lord has a daughter. Her name is Talia. At her birth, he summons the wise men and astrologers of his kingdom to cast her horoscope and tell him what her life will hold. They study the stars, they consult their charts, and they give him their answer. Talia will be endangered by a splinter of flax. The Lord issues an immediate decree. No flax, no hemp, no spinning material of any kind is to be brought into his house. Ever, under any circumstance. For years, the decree holds. Talia grows up in a house without thread, without spindles, without the ordinary tools of domestic life that every other household in the kingdom takes for granted. Then one day, she is standing at a window. She is a young woman now, grown and curious, and she sees an old woman passing in the street below. The woman is spinning. The thread twists and turns in the light. Talia has never seen a spindle in her life. She finds it fascinating. She calls the woman up to her. She takes the distaff in her own hand and begins to draw out the thread. A splinter of flax slides under her fingernail. She drops to the ground. The old woman, frightened, runs down the stairs and out of the house as fast as she can. The text says she is running still. The Lord has brought news of what has happened. He weeps. He pays for his grief with tears. The text says, the way you pay a debt with money. Then he has Talia dressed in her finest clothes, placed on a velvet throne under a canopy of brocade in a palace he owns in the country, and the doors fastened shut. He leaves. He never returns. He has locked his daughter, apparently dead, inside a palace in the countryside, and driven away to forget. This detail, the father who cannot bear to bury his daughter and so seals her away, then abandons her, recurs across multiple fairy tales in different forms. It is an act that is simultaneously loving and neglectful, grief-stricken and cowardly. He cannot let her go, but he also cannot stay. He pays for the palace and the velvet throne, and then he drives the memory from his mind and leaves her there, alone, in the dark, for years. If this sounds familiar from our episode on Cinderella, a father who stops seeing his daughter, that is not a coincidence. The same anxiety runs through both stories. Time passes. We don't know how much. The text does not say. Years, certainly. Perhaps many years. A king, not Talia's father, a different king, is hunting in the countryside. One of his falcons escapes from his wrist and flies through an open window of the abandoned palace. The king calls the bird. It doesn't come back. He sends his attendants to knock on the door. No one answers. The palace appears to be uninhabited. The king has a ladder brought, a vintner's ladder, the kind used to climb grapevines, and he scales the wall himself to look inside. He goes through every room. He finds no one. Nothing moves. The palace is silent and still. Then he reaches a room at the back, and he finds Talia. She lies on her velvet throne exactly as her father left her. She does not move when he calls her name. She does not stir when he shakes her gently. He leans close. He cannot tell if she is sleeping or dead. He sees only that she is beautiful. The text says, feeling his blood course hotly through his veins, he carried her to a bed. He leaves the palace afterward. He returns to his kingdom. He goes back to his life, his court, his duties, his queen. The text notes that for a while, he could not stop thinking about what he had found in the abandoned palace. Then, gradually, he forgot. Basile's text does not use the word. In 1634, the concept as we understand it today did not have the legal or moral framework it has now. But what is described is unambiguous. A man enters a room containing an unconscious woman, and he does not leave her the way he found her. The text is matter of fact about this. It neither condemns nor celebrates. It simply states what happened, the way the original Cinderella states that a woman danced in iron shoes until she died. The Grimms and Perrault would both later work around this detail in very different ways. But in 1634, Basile wrote it plainly. Talia is still in the palace, still on the bed, still not waking. Months pass. Her body changes. Two fairies appear. The story does not explain where they come from, and they tend to her, help deliver the children, and place the infants at her breast. The children nurse. They sleep. One of the twins, searching for milk, cannot find the breast. It takes the finger instead and sucks. It sucks so hard that the splinter of flax is drawn out from under the nail. Talia's eyes open. She is lying in an unfamiliar bed in an abandoned palace. Beside her are two infants she has never seen before. She does not know their names. She does not know where they came from. She does not know how long she has been there, or what has happened to her. She looks at them for a long moment. Then she names them. The boy she names Sunday. The girl she names Moon. She tends them. Food appears, brought by invisible hands. The story implies the fairies again, and she feeds herself and the children. Days pass, then weeks, then months. She lives in this abandoned palace with 2 children, no company, no explanation, and no way out. The king, back at his own court, eventually starts thinking about the abandoned palace again. He invents a pretext, a hunting trip, and rides out to find it. He climbs the same ladder. He goes through the same rooms. He reaches the back room. Talia is awake. Beside her are 2 small children, beautiful and healthy. The king is overjoyed. He tells her who he is. He tells her what happened. The text says, without irony, without apparent awareness of how this sounds, that he told her about it, and their friendship was knitted with tighter bonds. He stays with her for several days. He names the children Sun and Moon, or accepts the name she has already given them. The text is not entirely clear. He promises to return and take her to his kingdom. Then he goes home, to his wife. The king is already married. Talia, at this point in the story, either does not know this or the text chooses not to address whether she knows. He has a queen at home. He has been secretly visiting an abandoned palace in the countryside. He has 2 children he has told no one about. And when he returns from these visits, the text tells us, he mumbles their names in his sleep, Sun, Talia, Moon, until his wife finally confronts him. The queen has noticed her husband's distraction. She hears him murmuring names in the night, Talia, Sun, Moon, and she understands enough. She calls the king's secretary to her privately. She tells him she knows the king has been keeping a secret. She wants to know everything. She uses flattery, then threats. The secretary tells her. The queen acts immediately. She sends a messenger to Talia, claiming the king has sent for the children, Sun and Moon, to meet their father. Talia, who has no reason to suspect anything, sends the children happily. They are brought to the queen. The queen goes to the kitchen. She finds the cook. She tells him to slaughter the children and prepare them for dinner. She wants them served to the king himself, as his meal, so that he is eating his own children without knowing it. The cook is a good man. He takes the children to his wife and hides them in a back room. Then he kills 2 young lambs and prepares them instead. He brings the dish to the table. The queen watches the king eat and murmurs to herself, "Eat what you have made, you wretch. You are eating your own flesh." The king eats and finds the meal the finest he has ever tasted. The queen is not finished. She sends for Talia next, with the same false message, "The king has sent for you." Talia comes. She arrives at the court knowing nothing of what has happened to her children, nothing of the queen, nothing of the danger she is walking into. The queen receives her. She looks at her, and she tells her, with cold precision, that she is going to burn. A great fire has been built in the courtyard. Talia is to be thrown into it. Talia falls to her knees. She does not beg for her life. She begs for one thing, time to take off her clothes first. The queen agrees, not out of mercy, but because Talia's dress is embroidered with gold and pearls, and she wants it. Talia begins to undress. With each piece of clothing she removes, she screams. A scream for her robe, a scream for her skirt, a scream for her bodice, a scream for her shift. Each scream louder than the last. She is buying time, and the screams are carrying. The king hears them from inside the palace. He comes out and sees his wife, the fire, Talia half undressed, the terror of the scene. He demands to know what is happening. The queen tells him everything. Who Talia is, the children, what she has done with them. The king goes completely still. The king orders his wife thrown into the fire she built for Talia. She burns. Then he turns to find the cook, to have him executed for following the queen's orders, for slaughtering his children. The cook throws himself at the king's feet. He says, "Your children are alive. I hid them. I killed lambs instead. I could not do what she asked." The king stares at him. Then he calls for the children. The cook's wife brings Sun and Moon out from the back room. The king drops to his knees and gathers them into his arms. Then he gathers Talia. Then the children again. He rewards the cook richly and makes him a gentleman of the court. He takes Talia as his wife. The story ends with a proverb, offered without irony. Those whom fortune favors find good luck even in their sleep. I want to be direct about something before we go further. The ending of Basile's story presents Talia marrying the man who assaulted her while she was unconscious as a happy resolution. The proverb that closes the tale, "Those whom fortune favors find good luck even in their sleep," frames what happened to her as luck, as fortune smiling on her. A 21st century reader is going to have a strong reaction to that, and that reaction is legitimate. But I want to offer a few different lenses for looking at this story, because I think it contains more than just an excuse for what the king did, and understanding those layers is what this channel is for. The first thing to understand is that the Sleeping Beauty story, in its oldest versions, is not a romance. It is a story about helplessness, about the complete vulnerability of a person who cannot protect themselves, who has been placed in an impossible situation by forces outside their control, a prophecy, a father's fear, a moment of innocent curiosity, and who then becomes subject to everything that vulnerability invites. The story does not present the king's actions as heroic. It does not present them as loving. It presents them as what happens. The same cold matter-of-fact tone Basile uses for everything else. He finds her. He does not leave her as he found her. He leaves. This is the story of what being completely helpless invites from the world. There's a layer of the story that reads as a warning. The same kind of warning as the original Little Red Riding Hood, framed differently. A girl is made vulnerable by circumstances she didn't choose. The danger that comes is not supernatural. It is a man who finds her alone and unconscious and acts on his own desires. The original Little Red Riding Hood warned, "Be careful who you speak to in the forest." The original Sleeping Beauty warns, more darkly, "There is no behavior cautious enough to protect you from a world that will not protect you." There is also something worth noting about the Queen's response. She is usually read as the villain of the second half of the story, jealous, murderous, cannibalistic. And she is all of those things. But she is also the only person in the story who accurately identifies what happened. She knows her husband found a woman alone in an abandoned palace, and she knows what he did there, and she is enraged by it. Her rage is murderous and wrong in how it's directed, but it is not irrational. She is responding to a real betrayal. She is simply directing her violence at Talia instead of at the king. And then there is Talia herself. Talia, in Basile's version, does almost nothing. This is not a flaw in her character, it is the point. She is the most acted upon figure in the entire history of fairy tale heroines. Things happen to her. Curses fall on her. Men find her. Children are born from her body without her knowledge. Her children are taken from her. She is summoned to her own execution. She is saved by a man who is technically responsible for everything she has suffered. And the story calls this good luck. What Basile is recording, consciously or not, is something that was true for many women in 17th century Italy. That your fate was largely outside your control. That the most you could hope for was that the powerful people in your orbit would be kind rather than cruel. That fortune was not something you made. It was something that happened to you. And if it happened to go well, you were lucky. That is not a message modern readers can receive without discomfort, but it is an honest record of a world that existed. Charles Perrault read Basile. He took the same story and published his version in 1697, and the changes he made are a masterclass in how to preserve a plot while completely changing its moral content. The first and most significant change: the king does not assault the sleeping princess. He finds her, he kneels before her, and she wakes from the power of the moment. The text says she looked at him with eyes more tender than a first glance might seem to warrant, implying that during the long sleep, she had dreamed of him. The magic had prepared her for him. There is no violation. This change removes the most disturbing element of Basile's story, but it introduces a different kind of problem. It makes the sleeping woman's awakening dependent entirely on this specific man's presence. She cannot wake on her own. She cannot be woken by any other means. She waits for him. Her awakening is his to grant or withhold. The passivity of Talia, who at least woke up on her own through her children, is actually replaced by something more complete. Perrault also restructures the story significantly. In his version, the prince and the princess marry in secret and have 2 children before his father dies, and he becomes king. Then the ogress queen mother, His mother, not his wife, begins trying to eat the children and then the young queen. This produces a second act of considerable tension and genuine darkness, which Perrault handles with grim efficiency. The queen mother sends the cook to kill the 4-year-old daughter, mourning, and prepare her for dinner. The cook cannot do it. He hides her, kills a lamb, and serves it instead. The queen mother eats it happily and calls it delicious. The same process repeats for the 3-year-old son, Day. Then the queen mother orders the young queen herself prepared for dinner. Talia, or Sleeping Beauty, she has no name in Perrault, begs only that she be allowed to say goodbye to her children first. The cook leads her to the hiding place, and she discovers they are alive. The reunion is tearful and brief. The cook then cooks a hind and serves it to the ogress. The ogress eventually discovers the deception. She has a tub prepared in the courtyard, filled with vipers, toads, serpents, and she is about to throw the entire family into it when the king returns unexpectedly from war. He sees what his mother has done. Faced with exposure and the loss of everything, the ogress throws herself into the tub. The creatures in the tub consume her. The king is sad to have lost his mother, Perrault notes, even though she just tried to eat his children. But he is comforted by his wife and family. Perrault's version is, in many ways, more sophisticated than it's given credit for. The ogress queen mother is one of the more complex antagonists in the fairy tale tradition. She is monstrous, but she is also a woman trying to protect what she sees as her family's lineage from an outsider who appeared from nowhere. Her cannibalism is horrifying, but her underlying motivation, suspicion of the secret wife who appeared without her knowledge or consent, is not entirely unreasonable. Perrault gives her enough interiority that she is not simply a monster, even as she behaves monstrously. The Brothers Grimm published their version in 1812 as Dornröschen, Little Briar Rose. They simplified significantly, 12 wise women at the christening instead of 7 fairies. A 13th, uninvited, who curses the princess to prick her finger and die on her 15th birthday. A 12th wise woman softens the curse to sleep rather than death. The king burns all the spindles in the kingdom. The princess finds a hidden tower on her 15th birthday, finds a spindle, pricks her finger, falls asleep. The entire castle falls asleep with her. Thorns grow up around the palace, covering it completely for 100 years. Princes come. They try to force through the thorns. They are caught and die in the hedge. Then, on the day 100 years are up, a prince arrives. The thorns part for him on their own. He walks through. He finds the palace, the sleeping court, the princess. He leans down and kisses her. She wakes. Everyone wakes. They marry. End of story. The Grimms cut the entire second half. The ogress, the children, the tub of vipers, completely. They end on the kiss and the wedding. A clean resolution, requiring nothing from the princess except beautiful sleep and eventual awakening. And Disney, in 1959, took the Grimms' version and polished it further. Princess Aurora, 16 years old. 3 good fairies. Maleficent, a spinning wheel that appears as if by magical compulsion. Prince Philip, who fights a dragon and breaks the curse with true love's kiss. Brightly colored, heroic, triumphant. 325 years of adaptation. 400 years since Basile. And the distance traveled from the original is so enormous that the two stories share almost nothing except the girl and the sleep. I've been sitting with this story for a while, and I want to share what I think is happening underneath all of its versions, including Disney's. The Sleeping Beauty story, in every version, is built on a single image, a woman completely still, completely silent, completely passive, in a space that isolates her from the world. She is not acting. She is being acted upon. Everything that happens in the story happens to her, around her, because of her, but not by her. What changes between versions is what the world does with that vulnerability. In Basile, the world takes advantage of it. A king finds her and does what he wants. The story treats this as fortune and ends with marriage as resolution. This is an honest, ugly record of how the world worked for women in 1634. In Perrault, the world is given a choice. The prince chooses to be good. He kneels rather than acts wrongly. His mother chooses to be evil. The story becomes a test of the characters who surround the helpless woman, and the outcome depends on whether more of them choose good than evil. This is a more optimistic framework. The world contains both ogresses and faithful cooks, and the question is which one wins. In the Grimms, the world arranges itself, eventually, to reward patience. The 100 years of thorns are not an obstacle, they are a filter. The right prince, at the right time, finds the thorns already parting. This is the most fatalistic version. Good things come to those who wait long enough for fate to arrange them. In Disney, the world is divided cleanly into good and evil, and true love actively defeats evil. Aurora is not passive because of any honest reflection about women's lives. She is passive because the story needs a clear hero, and it decided the hero should be a man. What has been lost across all these retellings is something the original held onto despite itself. The idea that vulnerability is real, that the world does not always protect the vulnerable, and that the ending of your story depends heavily on forces outside your control. Basile's proverb, "Those whom fortune favors find good luck even in their sleep," is not a celebration. It is an acknowledgement. Talia got lucky. Many women in her position did not. The story knows this. The story is the record of what that luck looked like and what it cost. The version that has survived, the version that sells tickets and streams billions of times, is the version where luck has been replaced by love, where the girl is guaranteed to wake up because the right boy is coming, and his feelings are sufficient to break any curse. That is a more comfortable story. It may even be a necessary one, but it is not the story that has been told for 700 years. For episodes in, and we've covered Snow White, Little Red Riding Hood, Cinderella, and now Sleeping Beauty. And in every single one, the same pattern has emerged. A story about a girl in a dangerous situation. The original honest about what that danger actually was, and then successive layers of retelling that made the danger more abstract, the girl more passive, and the resolution more guaranteed. I don't think this is conspiracy. I don't think anyone sat down and deliberately decided to strip the darkness from these stories. I think it's something more natural than that. Each generation tells the stories in the language of what it can bear to hear, what it needs the world to be, what it wants to believe is possible for the people it loves. But the original stories are still there. Basile's Talia is still lying on her velvet throne in an abandoned palace. The old woman with the spindle is still running down the stairs. And those stories still have something to say about helplessness, about luck, about what the world actually does with vulnerability when no one is watching. The spindle was never the danger. The spindle was just the moment when the protection failed. These stories survived 1,000 years because people kept passing them on. If you want to help keep the real versions alive, like and subscribe. The next one is already coming.